Good morning. How we doing? Yeah? Okay, some of you are like, yes, the rest of you are like, no, it's a bad weekend. Right, who knows what's happening? Okay, so it's gonna be kind of a weird week, guys. We're gonna have class today. And then, I've had a family deal come up where I'm gonna have to be gone on Wednesday and Friday again. So what I'm gonna do is, whatever we don't get through today, I will record. I'll record the rest of the lecture for the fatigue and the VO2 stuff for you guys and get that posted. Hopefully I can get that done today or tomorrow. So we won't have class on Wednesday. Okay, on Friday, I've not told Ty this, but on Friday, Ty's gonna do a review with you guys. Think you can do that, Ty? Is that putting on the spot? Ty can do a review, and then any questions that you guys have, that can be answered, send them to me, and I'll record a video where I answer them. Okay, so as of right now, the plan is that we will have our test next Monday. Okay, we'll have the test next Monday. I know several of you guys are leaving for spring break very early, which always cracks me up on those things. So we'll try to keep it that way, so that we don't interfere with. Okay, questions about that? Kyle wants me to remind you that the metabolism worksheet is due tonight. That only about a quarter of the class has turned it in already. So just remember that's due. We're gonna move that over and give you guys 10 points of credit for doing it, okay? Also, Ty has office hours on Thursday. You can come and see him in person, you can do them virtually. We'll make all of that work, all right? And then if you guys need something, you can send me an email, you can send me a text message, and between now and then, and we can try to get you.
Maybe, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Can I just get a quick show of hands? How many of y'all would like to do another Jeopardy style review, or if you would like me to find another way to do the review? So just really quickly, it's not gonna hurt my feelings. Raise your hand if you would like to do Jeopardy again. All right.
It's like almost everyone. Okay. Very good. All right. So let's finish up metabolism, the lecture series that won't die. And then we can move on to actually putting metabolism into use. Okay. So we left off last week. The last piece that we were talking about is how we control the rate of each metabolic pathway. That's. No, do my people be here? I don't know. I don't really know how that goes. Well, we were talking about controlling glycolysis, okay? And remember, glycolysis is controlled in some ways by phosphorylase and how much glycogen we're breaking down and dumping in the glucose into it. The slowest step is PFK, phosphofructokinase, that third step, okay? So we're moving all that glucose that's got in down to pyruvate. The next control steps are that the split that we're going to get on where's the pyruvate going. And so is the pyruvate going to lactic acid, or is the pyruvate going into that sort of intermediate step, okay, into the peroxide? And so we've got LDH and then pyruvate dehydrogenase. And whichever one of these two enzymes is sort of winning or controlling everything, then that's the direction that pyruvate is going to go. Okay. All of your cells have an LDH enzyme in them. Your muscle cells, the rate of LDH is primarily determined by its fiber type. Train, do whatever you want. We can't really change your LDH function. Okay. You have a PDH enzyme in those same fibers, and you can't really alter that with training. What we can do, and what we do know about PDH though, is that as we begin to exercise, this will become important later today, PDH will speed up its activity. Okay, at rest, it is somewhat inhibited. But like all of our other ones, like phosphorylates, like PFK, ADP levels, calcium levels are going to drive an increase in the function of PDH. So as you begin to exercise, PDH begins to speed up, and you can put more and more pyruvate through into the mitochondria. Okay, that's our kind of big primary control steps there. Okay. So to really break this down, the big things that happen with pyruvate, with glycolysis, they're all about pyruvate. It's about that glucose to pyruvate, and then where's the pyruvate going? Okay, so if you look at this, the real things, we have those enzymes that are going to let us do this, but we've got sort of two things that are happening. Okay, the rate of pyruvate formation is our first step in control of glycolytic speed, right? How much glucose is getting dumped in? So phosphorylates plus our ability to take glucose out of the blood and PFKs. We're driving glucose to pyruvate. That happens at a certain speed. We can't really control that too much other than as we begin to exercise, that rate's going to speed up. The second one then is what happens once we have the pyruvate? Is the pyruvate going to lactic acid or is it going into the Krebs cycle? Okay. Those are going to be our two things that are controlled by LDH and PDH. Okay. There's nothing about glycolysis that has anything to do with oxygen. It's not stimulated or inhibited by the presence or lack of oxygen at all. Okay. It's an anaerobic pathway. Here's what I want you guys to understand. Okay. Making lactic acid will predominate. That will be the predominant sort of place where the pyruvate goes when you make so much pyruvate that it exceeds the capacity of PDH to move it into Krebs cycle. Okay, that's when it predominates. You're dumping so much glucose into glycolysis. You're making so much pyruvate that you can't handle it. The mitochondria can no longer handle it. Think of the glucose, right? Like we're pouring water into a glass or something, and that glass has a hole at the bottom, and the water can run out. Okay? And so as long as whatever I'm putting in, as long as the glucose that goes in and the pyruvate that gets made can leak out of the bottom at a sufficiently fast rate, I'm going to keep making that pyruvate into acetyl coenzyme A, and it goes into the Krebs cycle, and we're good to go. But when there's so much water coming in that it begins to overflow that cup, it can't run out at that same rate, and it spills out, then we're going to have to start making lactic. Okay, that's what happens. So when this happens during exercise, is in a couple of instances that should make sense to you guys. Okay, at the onset of exercise, when you start, I'm resting, I'm here, and I start running really fast. Okay. It takes a few minutes for the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain and PDH to basically warm up and get to their kind of maximal rate. Okay, that warming up is slower than what happens in glycolysis. So at the onset of exercise, very often we make more lactic acid than we do at that same exercise rate if we've been doing it for a half an hour. Okay, we're going to come back to that later. The other instance is when we have very high intensity exercise. When energy demand is so high, okay, that we're jamming all of this glucose in and we're just making a shit ton of pyruvate. Okay. And we've got to send it to lactic acid so we can recycle the NADH into NAD so glycolysis can. Those are the two primary times when glycolysis, right, when anaerobic metabolism tends to predominate. Early on during things that are going to be primarily aerobic, early on in exercise, we're going to make extra lactic acid, and then during very high intensity. Understanding this, will allow us to understand all of the adaptations in metabolism that occur with aerobic training and why they help us. Okay, why being more highly trained lets us basically pull more pyruvate into the Krebs cycle rather than going flat. Okay, that's kind of what's happening. Okay, questions about that? Okay. Rate control of oxidative metabolism, rate control in the Krebs cycle in the electron transport chain. Electron transport chain activity is pretty fast. It gets sped up by ADP levels. Okay, it's largely inhibited at rest. Okay, but it's primarily stimulated by ADP. It's pretty fast. It's usually not particularly limited. Okay, if we don't have oxygen, then the ETC is inhibited. Most of the time, we're going to have oxygen. As it speeds up, we need more and more oxygen. Hence, that's why when we measure oxygen consumption as exercise intensity goes up, as energy demand goes up, O2 use goes up. We're using more here. Okay. Of all of our pathways, the Krebs cycle is probably the fastest. It's probably the fastest. The rate of the Krebs cycle is mostly controlled by what happens at the electron transport chain. Okay. We have to have free electron carriers in order for the Krebs cycle to go. And so we get the free electron carriers based upon their ability to donate it to the electron transport chain. So Krebs is never really limited. It's usually never really limited. But it does speed up when ADP levels rise. Okay. So again, as we will see in a few minutes, at rest, Krebs and ETC are running at a rate that supplies us energy, but it's pretty slow compared to its maximum rate. And when we start exercising, we turn over more ATP, those speeds will increase, but it takes a few minutes. And that's why at the onset of exercise, we tend to make more lactic acid. Okay? That's why we tend to make more lactic acid. Okay. During submaximal exercise, metabolism is really not controlled by the presence or lack of oxygen. At maximal exercise, aerobic metabolism, so Krebs and electron transport chain, can reach their maximal rate. And there's a chance in some instances that can be limited by the availability of oxygen. It's rare, okay? It's rare, but it can happen, okay? So, I mentioned this a couple of minutes ago. When we train aerobically, one of the primary adaptations that happens when you run or bike or whatever you're doing is you get more mitochondria. You double the amount of mitochondria in the muscle fiber. How do you think doubling the amount of mitochondria might lead to the formation of less lactic acid?
How do we do when nobody answers? Squat.
Squat. Let's go. Somebody better give us an answer. Well, we're gonna squat. 21 seconds. Okay, down we go. I can sit here all day. It's down the hole, guys. The question is, why does increasing mitochondria limit lactic acid production? Pardon?
Greater pyruvate exception in the mitochondria.
Greater pyruvate exception into the mitochondria. That's right, but why? See you guys in the back of squatting. What are we doing? Okay. Anybody? Nobody wants to do, nobody wants to offer an answer. Y'all just want to squat the rest of the day.
From the 4 hours daily for pyruvate to go through the Krebs.
More opportunity, yes. Why is there more opportunity? There's more okay? It's very simple, okay? Very simple. I'll use a more tortured analogy. You have a doorway here, right? If all of you are pyruvate molecules, and you're all trying to get through this door, and I only open one of them, right? There's only so many of you who can get through, and then at some point you're like, fuck that, I'm going over there, right? That's lactic acid, here's into the Krebs cycle. If I double the amount of mitochondria, we get 2 doorways. Okay, so twice as many people can get through, therefore limiting the number that might want to go in this other direction. Okay, by doubling mitochondria, we can double the amount of pyruvate that has a chance to get put into, to get put into the Krebs cycle. Therefore, we make less lactic acid. You double mitochondria, you can now double the amount of lipid tissue that you can put into the Krebs cycle as well. So we have an increased ability to run aerobic metabolism just because we have more. Okay? Just because we have more. There's some fun enzyme kinetics and biochemistry involved in all of that we'll get into when we do training, but that's the general gist. Okay? That's the gist. Every one of you that is in better aerobic shape metabolizes more fat than my old out of shape self. Okay? If you want to burn more fat as fuel, be in better shape. Okay? That's the simplest way to do it. Okay? Okay. All right. Here's a thing that shows the rate limiting enzymes. I'm pretty sure that's one of the possible exam questions is what goes in, what comes out, what's the rate limiting enzyme. Here's some things that are on that. And then the very, very last one, okay, what I might do on the test is give you guys some scenarios. Distances or times of events, and then the proposed intensity, and ask you which metabolic pathway do you think will be the primary one we get energy from? Okay? And so what you see on the left is the percentage of energy that is aerobic and the percentage that is anaerobic. You have a time, and then on the right, it's some sort of on that same scale, some common sporting events or things that happen, right? So things that last a couple of seconds, regardless of intensity, it's all anaerobic, right? It's a couple of seconds, it's creatine phosphate. Here we go. Okay, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, as the time increases, right, we're shifting to more and more aerobic. Okay, and so then you can see on the right, like, what are the kinds of events and things that are going to be there. Okay, if I walk for 5 minutes versus walking for an hour, does that change the primary metabolic pathway? Based on in her head, yes. Why? You want to offer anything? Possible. So if I'm walking and I start walking, where is the energy coming from? Glycolysis, creatine phosphate a little bit, okay? So I'm going to get slightly more energy in 5 minutes of walking as a percentage, right? Because I've got that start point where I'm using primarily phosphagen systems for a little bit of glycolysis. Okay? But generally, walking is not particularly difficult. Most of you guys can walk, it's going to be primarily aerobic. If you're really, really untrained, like me, or say someone who is much, much older or has been very, very sedentary, then it switches back. Okay, but you're going to have to consider time and intensity. Okay, time and intensity. That's going to be where these things are going to come from. Okay. Ty will ask you some questions in review on Friday, where maybe we'll play out some scenarios on this and see what you guys can come up with. Okay. All right. Anything final? Are y'all ready to be done with metabolism in this way? Worst possible stuff ever. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put metabolism into practice. Okay. We're going to put metabolism into practice. A lot of what you're going to see here, you guys have already had, hopefully in 3813. Okay. So we're going to breeze through a little bit of the start. And we're going to focus on how we measure oxygen consumption during a bout of exercise and some key parameters that matter there. Okay. So remember, should have had this in health and fitness. Metabolism is about making energy. And so to measure metabolism, okay, we need to find a way to measure the amount of energy that you're using. So look at your neighbor, right, and try to figure out what could you do to them to measure energy consumption. Okay. Think about them. Could you touch them and measure energy? Don't touch them. I'm not encouraging you to touch them without the direction. Okay. But could you measure their energy production? Maybe. Right? How many of you have, right? You have a watch, you have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or something. Does it tell you your estimated caloric expenditure across a day? If you have it on. Okay. Whatever number it gives you is wrong. But it's not terrible. It's much better than it used to be. Okay. What does it do? How is it doing it? What does it measure? It's not breaking your skin, it's not doing anything. What's it measure? Yes, ma'am. Heart rate. It's measuring heart rate. Okay. Also, you have to tell it roughly how much you weigh. At some point, set it up. How tall are you? How much do you weigh? You could give it false numbers on that, and it'll give you different numbers on the back end. Okay. To measure energy production, we need to do one of two things. The best way is to measure a byproduct of metabolism, and that's heat. Okay. That is a process called direct calorimetry. We are wildly inefficient. We make energy. About 60% of the energy that we make is lost as heat. Okay. So we can put you in a chamber, circulate water in the walls of that chamber, have you live in that chamber or just exist in there for a while, and it will measure how much heat you're giving off by how much the temperature in the water rises. From that, we can back calculate energy expenditure. Amazingly accurate, incredibly infeasible, and worthless to us in a lot of ways, right? You don't live your life in a room. I mean, maybe some of you do. I don't mean you could, I guess, right? But you don't exercise like in your little single person dorm room or something like that very often, is my guess. Okay. Very accurate. It's very expensive. There is not one of these in the state of Oklahoma. We do not have one in the state of Oklahoma. Okay. I think the closest one is in Little Rock, Arkansas, up there at school. They have this. There might be one, there's probably one at KUMC in Kansas City, which might be a little closer than Little Rock, it's give or take. Okay. It does not work very well for short bouts of exercise, high intensity bouts of exercise. One, because it's slow to measure changes, and two, there's no way for us to measure the anaerobic contribution because there's no heat given off from that. Okay. There's no heat given off from that. So this is the best way, but very, very infeasible. Okay. So what we do instead, in some ways, we can do what your watch is doing. Okay. It's not particularly accurate. It's not bad. It's not particularly accurate. A better way would be to do something called indirect calorimetry, where we measure not oxygen use, which is weird, I know, right? We're using oxygen at the end of the electron transport chain. So we say we're going to measure oxygen consumption. What we're actually measuring and inferring oxygen consumption from is CO2 production. You're making carbon dioxide in the Krebs cycle, and we're making an assumption that whatever goes through the Krebs cycle then gets converted in the electron transport chain, and we use oxygen. So we sample air going in, we sample the air you breathe out, we look at the difference in O2 and CO2 in those two things, and we can back calculate from that then how much aerobic metabolism are you running? How much electron transport chain are you running? on all of that. Okay? It's very accurate, not as accurate as heat production, but it's very accurate. But it's also somewhat infeasible, right? If I told any of you guys, we're gonna get you a fanny pack, or we're gonna put a Met cart in the fanny pack, which we can. And I'm gonna give you a mask, and you gotta wear a mask around all day, go to all your classes, go to work out, all your stuff, wear this mask. You guys volunteering to do that? Most of you probably not, right? For obvious reasons. One, it's cumbersome, and two, like everyone's gonna be like, what are they doing, right? Most of us don't want to be the center of attention in that way all the time. Okay? It's good for doing bouts of exercise stuff. You can come to the lab, you can hook you up to the mat card, you can breathe, you can collect the air you're inspiring and expiring, and get very, very active. So most of what we know about metabolism during exercise has come from using this technique. Okay? It's come from this technique. So here's a lovely picture that's about as old as I am, okay, of a guy on an old treadmill. The treadmill was old when they were doing this. This ancient treadmill, you can see they're breathing, and we're pulling air in from the left side, we're breathing the air out on the right. We collect it, it goes through this thing called a metabolic cart. These things are way more sophisticated now. They make them, they're very, very small, so you can put them in a fanny pack. Dr. Pinku has a little tiny one, right? It goes in a fanny pack. It can be very mobile. You can wear it around, but it analyzes O2 and CO2, and then it spits stuff out. Okay. If you guys have taken exercise testing prescription, you take an exercise physiology lab, you all will get to use these pieces of equipment. You can see things. Okay. So that's how we know what happens during a single bout of exercise. Okay. Things that we need to understand from this. Things that we know because of all of this. Okay. All of you have, if we put you into a coma, okay, all of you have a certain amount of calories that you need to burn, a certain amount of energy you need to make at rest, doing nothing throughout the day. We call that your resting metabolic rate. Okay, your resting metabolic rate. This is which basically we can usually measure this with whole body O2 consumption. If you want to know your resting metabolic rate, come to the lab first thing in the morning. We'll put you on a bed, put this little hood, a little bubble over your head, and you just lay there with the lights off and basically take a nap for an hour. Okay? And we can get your metabolic rate, your resting metabolic rate. Okay? RMR is slightly different than basal metabolic rate. Basal metabolic rate is the assumption that you are only expending the calories that you need to maintain the barest minimum of physiological function, right? You are essentially in a coma, okay? All that you're doing, there's no extra movement, there's no real extra stuff from feeding, like nothing going on. You're not watching Netflix or anything else to raise any kind of heart rate. You're just there. You're just barely existing. So basal is a little bit lower than rest. It's hard for us to estimate basal, right? We can try to measure it in people in a coma and get some ideas, but mostly what we measure is rest. Okay. If you look in the book, it will say that resting metabolic rate in most people is somewhere between 1,800 to 3,000 kcals per day. The higher resting rate is primarily linked to increased muscle mass. Okay, it's increased muscle mass. Muscle is your most metabolically active tissue. So more muscle, you get to eat more Chick-fil-A. Okay, that's what's going on. Personally, I'm surprised the books put this in there. Those estimates are way too high. They're way too high. Whatever your watch tells you that you're burning in the day, it's an overestimate. They always overestimate. They never underestimate. If you look at the research on the Apple Watches and those things, and you go and you do a lot of exercise, and you compare their estimated caloric expenditure to what we measure by on the net cart, it's always an overestimate. Right? It makes you feel better about it. There's nothing wrong with that, but it leads to some problems. Okay? I would argue that for, say, a sort of normal, I don't know, 100 and let's just say, get myself in trouble here. You hear my wife in the back of my head today. 110 to 135-pound college age woman, right, somewhere in that range. Okay, which is kind of the most common kind of areas where we are. Resting rate, y'all are probably somewhere between 750 and 1,000 kcals per day. Okay, if we measure your muscle mass with the DEXA scan, we can estimate it out from all. That's probably what you need if you just sat on the couch. Okay. Now, y'all are pretty active, you move around, you walk around campus, you do those kinds of things, then your daily expenditure might get to 1,500 or 1,800 or something like all of that. Right? Average college age male, we'll say they weigh between 170 and 190 pounds or something like that, right? They just sat around and did nothing, maybe 15 to 1,800. Okay, that's where you are. We have to keep those numbers in mind if we're thinking about altering body composition, weight loss, and those things, if that is a goal that certain people have. We dramatically overestimate our caloric needs in particular. Okay. Now, some of you, you're very active. You need a shit ton. You need a bunch. Okay. But most people don't. If your resting metabolic rate is 800 kcals a day, right? When I jokingly say you go to Chick-fil-A and you have a hash brown and a chicken biscuit, you've already had your entire day's caloric needs in one food. Right there. Hard for us to exercise enough to burn 800 calories a day. It's 8 miles. Okay, of those kinds of things. So you just gotta we have to keep all of this in mind when we think about what these resting rates are in the midst of all. Okay. So I think that's a thing to keep in mind. It's less of an issue in you guys. It becomes much more of a factor when you get to be my age or even older as muscle mass begins to decline and trying to kind of maintain body weight and these things. Okay. As I said, fat-free mass is the primary determinant. More muscle, higher resting rate. Body surface area matters a little bit. More body surface area, the more you weigh, the more heat you have to dissipate. That actually costs us energy. Okay, so more area, more energy required to move heat. You spend a little bit more. Body temp matters, stress matters, hormone levels matter. Okay, thyroid hormone matters, drives metabolic rate on all of those things. When you're hot or you're cold, you expend more calories. Okay, when you're comfortable, less so. Okay. When you're stressed, epi and norepi rise, it drives increased metabolic rate on some of those things. Okay, so all other things to consider when we're looking at whatever these things are. Okay. Okay. Now that's at rest. Okay, that's at rest. During exercise, things begin to change. In order to exercise, what must I generate more of? In order for me to walk, what do I have to make? Why do I need ATP? All right, what do I need the ATP for? Which gives me force. Very good. Okay. To move, I need force. I need the energy to make force. Okay. So when I start walking, I need a little bit of force. So metabolic rate goes up a little bit. When I want to jog, I need even more force. So metabolic rate goes up even higher. When I go to sprint, I need more force still. So it goes up to even greater extent. Okay. Energy use during exercise is proportional to work rate. Work is force multiplied by distance. I need the force to cover the distance. I need the force to do the work. I need the energy to generate the force. Okay. That's why energy expenditure goes up. That's why it goes up a little bit when you walk, more when you jog, and even more when you sprint. Okay. When we graph everything out, and we're going to talk exclusively now about using indirect calorimetry, using measures of oxygen consumption, right? This is what we're getting at the end of aerobic metabolism during different bouts of exercise. VO2 increases in a fairly linear manner with an increase in work rate. Okay, I go from rest, and I'm using 3.5 mLs per kg per minute of oxygen while I sit here. I start walking, it's now 12. I start jogging, now it's 24. I jog really fast, now it's 36. On and on and on. Okay? Energy use, that's as we keep increasing. When you start an exercise and you go at that same pace, so I'm here and I start walking and I walk at the same speed, I'm on level ground, gravity is the same, I weigh the same. And once you start a thing and you stay at that particular pace or that intensity, energy use goes up and then it levels off and it will stay right there where it was. Okay? We call this a steady state or achieving a steady state in oxygen consumption. Okay? It takes us usually a couple of minutes to reach a steady state. Okay? We'll talk about that in a minute, but as long as we're doing kind of light and moderate intensity activities, we can reach a steady state. Work rate is the same, so we're being maxed out of aerobic metabolism, it will stay nice and flat. Okay? You guys remember in health and fitness, when you did the thing on the old crappy Monarch bikes and you measured your heart rate, you did the estimate, the VO2 max test, and you did 3-minute stages, right? And you would go and you'd see if your heart rate was nice and flat and steady. Heart rate change tracks the change in oxygen consumption. It goes up a little faster, but it will reach a steady state. In those 3-minute stages, they last 3 minutes to give you a chance to reach a steady state. Kind of figure out. Usually, most of us, within a couple of minutes, we can get there if we're going to. And we'll talk about the instances when we don't. Okay? At very high work rates, even if we can supply the energy from aerobic metabolism, we typically don't reach steady state. This is a problem. You get to a place, and rather than it being flat, it wants to trickle upwards. It sort of trends upwards a little bit. We call this a slow component rise in oxygen consumption. The slow component rise generally indicates we're making some lactic acid, we're increasing body temperature, and we're having to dissipate more heat. And the work rate is sufficient that we're likely not as sort of metabolically efficient in our movements, right? There's some extraneous arm movement or head movement or shoulder movement. So we're using extra energy because our form is beginning to break down. Intensity is high, it's uncomfortable, something like that. Okay. You ever want to see people that are the most relaxed people in the entire world? Watch elite track athletes that run in the distance. Watch elite marathon runners run. Nothing moves but like their legs, their arms, just a little bit. The face is just like slack. They're just like freaking speeding around, super chill. Okay? No extra energy being used anywhere. They want it all to go to their working muscles to do things. Okay? All right. This is going to call back in some ways to what we just showed at the end of the last lecture. For events lasting longer than about 45 seconds, we're going to get energy from all of our systems, but by about 60 seconds, we're about 70% anaerobic, about 30% aerobic. We've blown through our creatine phosphate, okay? And we're starting to kind of get aerobic ramped up. At about 2 minutes, we're about 50-50 aerobic, anaerobic, okay? And anaerobically, it's primarily coming from glycolysis because we've used all of our creatine phosphate. In prolonged exercise, we're going to say greater than 10 minutes, but really by about 5 or 6 in most of us, if we can maintain that pace, it's going to be all aerobic. Okay. So to do things longer than 10 minutes, it's primarily the aerobic systems. We generally see a steady state in O2 consumption. Okay. And we can maintain at that particular pace as long as we can maintain our form and we don't change our work rate. Okay. So very, very sort of kind of fast things. All right. What I'm graphing here, okay, The sort of straight line that you see that goes up is the oxygen consumption graph. This is measured in liters per minute of oxygen. This is not normalized to a person's body weight. The shape of the curve would be the same. We'll get to that. I'll probably have to get to that when I talk about for you guys that I'm going to record for Wednesday. Okay. On the x-axis, this is power output on the bike. This is watts. So it's easy. It's moderately hard. It's hard. It's very, very hard. As the work goes up, you see this nice linear increase in oxygen consumption. The secondary line here, this dashed black line, is we are graphing as the work rate goes up, the increase in lactic acid. So up to about here, right? Almost wholly aerobic is providing stuff. We're starting to make more and more lactic acid. We're over lactate threshold, and then it progressively increases as we go along because demand is so high that we're maxing out aerobic, but we're also having to shunt a bunch of pyruvate into lactic acid. Okay. That is as you ramp intensity up. This graph shows what happens at a similar intensity over a 5-minute span. Okay. Here you're cycling at 50 watts for 5 minutes, 100 watts for 5 minutes, 150, 200, 250, 300 watts. Okay. So I put you on that Monarch bike and you're just puttering along, you know, barely any resistance at about 50 watts. So you will note how we get a rise in O2 consumption in the first minute or minute and a half, and then it's nice and flat the rest of the way out. This is a steady state, right? You're able to easily match energy demand to the aerobic systems, and you get this nice, flat, steady oxygen consumption over time. As I make the intensity higher, at 100 watts, I still have a steady state. But look, it takes me longer to get to that steady state because the energy demand is higher. I will get there, but rather than getting there in the first minute, it takes me 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes. At 150, at 2, at 250, note how it takes a little bit longer. And then those lines are breaking, and you see 2 of those, 2 kind of magenta lines and 2 of those green lines there over time. What's happening in those instances is that showing you a slow component rise in oxygen consumption. It's intense enough that it's hard for us to get to a steady state. It wants to creep upwards for us just a little bit. The same thing would happen at 250 and 300, but you're basically reaching kind of a max on all of those. They've not really drawn that graph correctly. That's this idea between what is a steady state and what is a slow movement. Okay. All right. One of my favorite things that we're going to do. Okay. One of my favorite. All right. We're going to illustrate this again. All right. You guys are resting. Imagine that you're squatting. Just in your head. Imagine that you're doing squats. Okay. I'm going to start squatting. Okay. Ooh, the hips are high. That's nice. Right? I weigh the same. Gravity is the same. Right? I go from resting metabolic rate to immediately needing however much energy I need to generate the force to move myself. Does that make sense? Okay. I go from rest here, and then I start exercising, and immediately I need 100 molecules of ATP per second. Let's just say to make the math easy. Okay. I'm squatting. I need 100 a second to make that work. Okay. Initially, my aerobic metabolism cannot supply all of that 100 ATP molecules fast enough, okay, to allow me to have it in those first few reps. Okay. So what happens is energy demand goes from here, follow that dashed line up to the top. Okay. That's how much I actually need. But then the red line is what is able to be provided by aerobic. So all of that area on that graph, as I squat initially in the first couple of minutes, that purple area denotes energy that I'm using to do my squats that's not coming from aerobic metabolism. Okay? It's coming from the breakdown of creatine phosphate. It's coming from pyruvate going to lactic acid, coming from glycolysis primarily. Okay? That area is called an oxygen deficit. Oxygen deficit. Energy provided generally at the start of a bout of exercise. It does not come from aerobic metabolism. Okay? You go from nothing to demand. Demand stays exactly the same. Maybe I'm squatting, maybe I'm walking, maybe I'm jogging. It doesn't matter what the exercise about is. You need X amount of energy to do that, and that stays constant. But there's this lag, right, in aerobic metabolism being able to supply all of that energy. That lag is due to, we need ADP to stimulate more pyruvate formation. We need ADP to stimulate PDH to shunt more of that pyruvate into the mitochondria. We need ADP to stimulate the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. We have to speed aerobic metabolism up because it's largely inhibited at rest in order to get us to that particular place. Okay? That's called oxygen deficit. How many of you guys have ever just gone from I'm doing nothing, now I'm going to go for a jog, and you go and you jog or you ride the bike or something, and you're at a pace that you can normally do, and it's fine, it's not a big deal. But you feel really shitty for the first few minutes when you do something, and then as you continue going, you begin to feel better, right? That's a real physiological thing. Because what is happening is when you're in O2 deficit, you make lactic acid, and it makes your muscles burn. And it's trying to inhibit things, and that's why you feel bad. And once you can get to the point where we speed aerobic metabolism up, and now it provides the energy, you stop making lactic acid and you feel better. Okay? And you feel better. That's O2 deficit. The magnitude of that purple area is determined by the speed of your aerobic metabolism. Okay? And what the work rate is. When the work rate is really, really high, O2 deficit gets bigger. It's going to take longer for aerobic metabolism to get up to be able to supply that much ATP. Okay? Conversely, when you're better trained and you have a better functioning aerobic metabolism, it can get sped up faster. Okay? And your O2 deficit will begin to shrink. Okay? So that's a real thing that is happening. This is by measuring O2 deficit. In most of us, this is the only way we can measure anaerobic energy contribution to exercise ever. We can put you guys in an MRI machine and try to measure creatine phosphate depletion, but you're doing isometric exercise, you're not running, you're not doing anything that's sort of what you would do in your everyday life, unless you're in a magnet that costs us $2,000 an hour to lift. Okay? If any of you have any spare like $10 million laying around, you want to invest in something, buy an MRI machine. Okay? It's like $2,000 an hour. You can build insurance to you. Okay. I will cover in my video, I will cover EPOC. I'll cover fatigue things. Okay. I will get that posted. I will talk about it more on Friday if you have questions. And then I will see you guys next Monday for our test. I'll be in here at 8:30 again. You can start early. If you would rather take your test in the office, then go to the ARC. You can email me and we'll set that up as well. Okay? Thanks, guys.
Just that the metabolism worksheet tonight, so if you haven't finished that already, make sure you completed that. And that we
It's yours?
won't be having class Wednesday. He'll be gone Friday, but I'm gonna host a review on time.